Our analysis of Congress is that there are some 500 people there. At least 300 of them are akin to airport windsocks. And that is, when you talk to them about a public policy issue, they have their hand up to see which way the wind is blowing, regardless of whether or not they're charmed by your arguments. Well, that means that that leaves several hundred, maybe, who have some sort of philosophy. I don't know whether maybe it's 100 real bad ones and 100 that are better, but there are very few for whom I personally have a great deal of respect. Now, there are some of them who I have more respect for, but there are some good people there for sure, who are both good people and who both agree with me on many things. So I have a great deal of respect. But I should say that there is no member of Congress for whom I have greater respect than our final speaker this afternoon, Congressman Ron Paul. He is a representative from Texas, the 22nd District. He is a physician, got his medical degree from Duke University as a graduate of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. He has been very active in the issue of gold, and he serves now as a member of the Gold Commission, and he wrote a book called Gold, Peace, and Prosperity. An example of Dr. Paul's voting record can be attested to by the fact that in the first 2 years that the Council has had a survey of Congress on some 60 bills, Congressman Paul has been far and away the outstanding member of Congress in our voting study. He's also received the top rating from the National Federation of Independent Businesses watchdog of the Treasury, and he's also been named the taxpayer's best friend by the National Taxpayers Union. He heads a foundation, nonprofit foundation called the Foundation for Rational Economics and Education, which publishes a paper called the Freedom Report. We started out with Leonard Liggio talking about ideas have consequences, but ideas don't exist simply in the ether. They have to get somewhere into the public policy realm. And we've asked Dr. Paul to talk this afternoon to us as a close to our convention about the politics of these radical ideas. Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you this afternoon. I feel like there's not going to be a whole lot I can offer to a sophisticated audience like this who have heard all the experts and explained to you the best way to solve our problems. But I do have a special perspective on this problem that we face by being a member of Congress, and one who certainly joins the Council in their desire for a competitive free economy. It was mentioned by Richard the awards that I've won, like voting most often for competition, for the least amount of taxes and the least amount of spending. It was not too long ago in the last election that we had a corporation that we were soliciting support from and hoping at least to neutralize them so the money didn't go to the opposition. And we sent word to them we were seeking their support, and the spokesman came back and said, well, yes, we sort of like what he's doing, but he's not pro-business. And, of course, we found out a little bit more about what pro-business means, and I'm sure you can guess. Pro-business doesn't necessarily mean an opportunity to compete and to earn a profit, produce a product and a service, and withstand the tests of the free market. Pro-business means that you should help them a little bit. And in this particular case, they had come to me and asked me for an assistance in getting a grant, a contract, and we weren't too receptive to it. And this made them unhappy, and therefore they were going to challenge me and have persistently, and they certainly passed the word around that I'm not pro-business. Now, I think most of you can understand that rather clearly, what pro-business means, and the problems we face in Washington as politicians who will advocate a free market position. Some days it's very discouraging. You think, well, you'll never get anywhere because the system is built in to benefiting only the special interests, and the politicians know the system. All we have are bureaucrats and programs up here to deal with, and there's not much chance that we can get our views and our ideas across. I think there's every bit of a reason to be optimistic, even though we have those down moments. There has been a tremendous change. I first went to Congress in '76. I lost after that, but it was an early start for me in '76. And I would say compared to '76 till now, there's quite a bit of difference about what's happening. Not necessarily in legislation, but what's happening in the country and among groups like this. And that's where the difference is. I was fortunate enough not too long ago to be invited to a group in Milwaukee, a free market group that I was very impressed by. Just the other night, I was invited up to Newark, New Jersey. And this was, they said, when the information came to me from the staff, they said this Chamber of Commerce group wants you to talk up in Newark. And I stopped and I said, Newark wants a Chamber of Commerce, wants me to talk? I said, do they know, who I am? And they said, oh, yeah, they know. They want to talk about free enterprise, and they believe in it. And I said, are you sure? And so the conversation went back and forth. And they said, yes, they really believe in free enterprise, and there's some good guys up there. And they know exactly your voting record, and they want you to come up and defend it. And I said, well, I need some more credentials. And finally, I got some more information. Seems like Richard might have even recommended them. I can't recall who all said, but they said, yes, it's a good group. They know what they're doing, know what they're talking about. And I thought, well, the real test will be this. I said, well, if they're really, really serious, and they did ask about talking about the gold standard also. I said, see if they offered an honorarium. I said, see if they'll agree to the contract and pay me in gold. And sure enough, they came back and they said they'd pay me in gold. So I thought, well, I guess for the first time, I'll come north of the Mason-Dixon and east of the Mississippi, and I'll venture in. And but it was a delight. I mean, it was a good group. It had a foundation associated with the group. And I think it's very encouraging to know that this exists outside of Texas. I thought only Texas had the good guys. So, but ideas are changing. The rhetoric's getting a little bit better in Washington. I still think we have a long way to go in Washington to correct the ills. I am a firm believer in the saying that ideas do have consequences. But I take this into consideration in light of the fact that politics sometimes move and meander about for non-essential reasons. It isn't so direct. I think that most people still do vote for very, very superficial reasons. And this can almost be used to our benefit as well, because in spite of my voting record, which is rather definitely defined as far as not voting for subsidies, even for my own district, which becomes difficult to defend in a political campaign. For instance, we have 3 major projects in our district that would be considered federally necessary to exist. And we need the federal government. That is the Port Authority, which needed more money, the flooding areas that needed federal flood insurance, and also the NASA project, which is rather large for Houston. And sometimes you can get away with a bad vote if they don't know about it. But those 3 issues were used day in and day out against me in the campaign and said, Ron Paul doesn't even care about his own district. He votes against us all the time. And it's principally a Democratic district, so it isn't a partisan thing that was going on. I'm not in an 80% Republican district, so I wasn't guaranteed an election regardless. It's principally a Democratic district. So the conception or the perception of most everybody on the House floor when they're voting is that, yes, they got to see which way the windsock's blowing in order to survive as a politician. I think they're misconstruing things. I think the American people are much more sophisticated and much more willing to look at issues in some sort of way. Because in spite of that, I was still able to, achieve a political victory, that is, not lose on the fact that I did not become the champion of the handout that people are willing to. But in the same sense, did all those people out there, those 50 plus 0.01% who elected me, did they really understand my philosophy, the free market? Did they understand all the ideas? I don't think so. I think that the ideas were important. I think the ideas of interventionism has been important to move the country in a bad direction for a long time, and that the ideas that I hold and the ideas that the people who support me hold and the ones who are willing to work and send me money, those ideas are critical to me and to the movement. And the perception that the people hold is critical. It will be a mixture, though, of something very, very superficial. My estimation about how people vote for candidates is not so much that they voted for me, not so much that I was a champion of the free enterprise system, but somebody who voted honestly and did my very best and that they could trust me. And I think that perception probably was overbalanced, all the negative approach of saying, well, he isn't getting enough for us. Matter of fact, it sort of built, it almost confirmed the fact that they could trust me because I was even willing, to take a stand that might be conventionally construed as non-political. So certainly ideas have consequences. They're critical to the ultimate destiny of the nation. And yet, on a day-in, day-out political battle, I think you have to take this and weigh it. There's a relative weight to it. But the ultimate nature of the government and the country will depend on the ideas that groups like this develop and the ideas that you hold and the perceptions, especially of those who contribute and work in campaigns. But when it comes down to pulling a lever, it will be for quite a different ways. And I think this is a way you can bring the conflict together that politics never deal in real ideas versus the idea that everybody deals only that people only deal in ideas, because I think it's a combination of both. In '76, I would say the perception of my views that I took were looked at in a much more negative way than they are looked at now. The word libertarian is used quite frequently with the free market, and it's a different meaning for some than for others. But in general, they will associate my views with a libertarian view or a free market view. In '76, I would say there were very, very few who even heard the word or understood it or even asked about it. And yet today they will kiddingly come up to him and they say, well, what's the libertarian position on this? And this means that they're becoming aware that there is something else, that there is another viewpoint besides the competing forces that are using government in a conservative way versus a liberal way. And they see that there is another stand. And over time, I hope I can persist with gaining respectability for it, in that they respect the view. They might not agree with it, but I find that they're not ashamed of it, because even though they might not be anxious to take those rare stands on the House floor that are dangerous politically but correct philosophically, but if there happens to be a rating where there's only 5 or 10 votes and they happen to do well on it, more or less accidentally, but my name is associated with it, it seems like they would like to use that. They would like to benefit, and go back, march into their district where they may have been voting too liberal, and go to their conservative friends and say, look, see, I have credentials now. I voted with somebody who knows and understands and believes in the free market. So they do want to cling to somebody or some things that are related to sound principles. Yesterday, we had a pretty typical example of the conflict of those who would like to deal in ideas, who would like to follow the general rhetoric of what's been happening in the last several months, versus the old problem of the political interpretation of what they should do with a vote. And this was the agriculture bill. And I think it's interesting if I just tell you a little bit about what happened, because it tells you about what happens generally in legislation. The vote came up. We were ready for final passage. The committee member, who's usually managing the bill, standing at the desk, and he was standing there, and he's usually the one responsible for getting a recorded vote. And the minority side usually asks for it, because we're usually on the losing side of a particular vote. And this was a large appropriation. But as it came up, and everybody had hung around from the last amendment vote because they knew final passage would come up and there would be a recorded vote. And all of a sudden the speaker looked and paused for a minute, and the fellow sat down and it was passed. I mean, it was hardly by a whisper. And this multi-billion-dollar budget was passed. It was many billions of dollars over the, hold back, I don't know exactly how many dollars over, but it was over the president's request. And there's a question of whether the president might even veto the agriculture bill because it's higher than the budget resolution. There was no recorded vote. And the main reason was this. There are a lot of conservative Republicans in the Midwest who believe that they cannot ever vote against an agricultural bill and get reelected. If I can vote against NASA and get reelected, they ought to consider it, you know. But they said we couldn't do it, and they didn't want to, of course, if they voted for it, then they would say, well, there you go, you voted to break the budget. So, of course, it would be better not to have a vote. But then an unusual procedure after it was substituted with the Senate number, which was essentially just a parliamentary maneuver, then another member out of the farm district came and asked for a vote, and they got a recorded vote at an unusual time. So we did go back and had a recorded vote. But there at that time, the conservative Republican, who has been the champion, the leader of your cause to cut spending, is moaning and groaning. You know, oh my God, now I have to vote for this. So there is a lot of that goes on. They're not, serious enough, nor do they have a comprehension of what really needs to be done in the Congress, which means that we should, cut the budget. The truth is we're not cutting the budget. The budget is very, very high. It's way above last year's budget. And with the planned increases in the defense, military, foreign aid budget, it's out of control. I imagine most people here know the name Hans Sennholz. I was talking to Dr. Sennholz yesterday, and I think the announced, and Bruce probably knows these figures better than I do, the announced deficit for last year, I believe I saw, was at $55 billion, somewhere in that range. And yet he claims with his calculation of off budget, I need to run this down and check him out, make sure he's giving me the right figures. But he claims that there's $141.5 billion of real debt increase, for last year's budget when you take off all the off budget. So there's still a lot of deficits going on, and that means there's still going to be a bit of pressure on the Federal Reserve. Now, the one area that I work in the most and was mentioned in the introduction that I'd like to talk about a little bit, where I think ideas do have consequences, and that debate and talk has developed into a popular movement, and that is on the money issue. In 1974, I ran for the very first time, and it was out of frustration over what happened in 1971 in the Republican administration with wage and price controls and the closing of the gold window. And it was the money issue that I was most interested in. And I was not elected that year, but came up here in 76. And it was mostly laughs about what was going on with the monetary system. Yet now there's a serious discussion going on. We have a gold commission that's been established. A lot of people will call up and say, just tell me just what is the most optimistic thing you think can happen with the Gold Commission after you do all your report? You're not in the majority. They'll ask it in a very negative way. They'll say, well, the best benefit has already come, and that is it's a public discussion. It's in the Wall Street Journal and in Barron's and Time and Newsweek, all the conventional magazines, ABC, CBS, McNeil, Lair, and everybody's talking about it now. Not because all of a sudden they have become philosophic and believe that we ought to have a morally and constitutionally sound currency, but out of desperation because we have such a lousy currency that is depreciating so quickly and that the bond market's being wiped out and they can't build houses. So out of necessity, they do have to look for a new idea or a different idea, a different approach. And it just happens that the Gold Commission was established and in place and the need came along. The commission certainly has been the vehicle for the discussion. The need has blended in, and there's a very, very serious discussion going on. We will have our third meeting for the Gold Commission on Monday. So this is an event that moved much quicker than I ever dreamed. I would have thought that it would be several more years before a serious discussion would occur. And I'm even now lean toward more pessimism and say, there's still no chance that anything's going to happen it's going to be a long time. But there are others who believe that you should have a gold-backed currency who are much more optimistic and think it could even occur within months. Now, I don't happen to believe that. But I was surprised about the rapidity of the changes that have occurred since '76. And I am hopeful for that. I do believe, though, that the idea put out by Hayek, or at least popularized by Hayek, I can't believe he was the originator, that is, of competing market currencies. And this is catching hold. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, the Chamber of Commerce is pretty soon going to be, I'm going to be championing the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, they wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal yesterday and talked about competing currencies. So, and looking back in just another aside on who may be on our friends, in the debates in 1968 when we took off the 25% cover, the Small Bank Association, the small group of bankers were strongly disapproving the removal of the gold cover. The ABA was for it, but the smaller banks were for it, for holding on to a gold currency. And I still run into a lot of bankers, and usually, so often, hard money people say, well, the bankers, are inflationists. Well, some of the big bankers are, but there are a lot of bankers who believe in honesty and sound money. And I think that we're moving in the right direction, and quickly, because somebody did take the time to write down an idea and something that I can hang my hat on and to use, and in some way or another popularize it or get voted for other reasons. I might not be able to explain all those things well enough to all my constituents, but if I can convince them, I'm going to do my very best to give them something that we would call an honest currency, and they trust me, yes, then the ideas will have a consequence when I go to Washington and try to implement these ideas, regardless of how I get there. And this is some of the political mistakes made by some. They believe that if you're a purist in thought and you're going to go to Washington to be a purist, therefore you have to put everything out on the table exactly as it would be, and everybody understands every iota of anything you've ever said. Well, that sounds good, and your workers should understand everything you believe in. But in a campaign, that's not true. In a campaign, it's going to be votes coming for various reasons, very, very superficial reasons. And in politics, you take your votes how you get them. You don't refuse a vote because somebody's voting for you because they misunderstood you. And you say, well, I don't want your vote because I'm really not for that. You just live in the real world of politics. But when we get there, we have to do something. Which is most important? This is often a debate. Is the idea world more important than the political world? And I had somebody come up to me the other day and they tried to discourage me. They say, it's time you drifted away from the world of ideas and got more involved in the world of politics. Get your political action committee going and start, you raising money and getting certain members into the Congress, which is a reasonable suggestion for somebody who does deal in politics. But he was de-emphasizing and said, the groundwork has been done. We've done the work, and everybody knows what the free market ideas are, and we don't need to concentrate so much in the educational aspect. Well, I don't think that's quite true. I think we still have a lot more work. But I don't say that education is the only thing and politics is nothing. I've had some very good libertarian friends who say, yes, educate yourself, take care of yourself, help your neighbor, and educate your neighbor, but forget about the government. The government's the enemy. You can't change government. You can't even participate in government. But I don't buy that, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. I can do a little bit better staying in Texas. I don't have to come up here and run around if I didn't believe that some form of government is necessary and good and that we can change it, and feel very fortunate that we have a government and a system free enough where we can change it, where we can get involved, where we can go out and do something. And I think that's so important. But the ideas, I think, are critical, and we have to work with them. We have to continue with it. What's so wonderful about it is in a group like this, some might be more inclined to working only with ideas and others only in politics, and, that's fine. But I think it takes both. I think the ideas have to be there, and you have to have an ideological movement before the politician can do anything. And I think that we're all, in a transition, and I think I'm really in the middle, at the beginning, in the middle of that transition, that I can even see it where, a hard line approach in 76 was scoffed at much more so than now. But books like Bob has coming out, they're going to be great assistance. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be done. Somebody needs to put one of those in the hands of every legislative assistant in Congress. That would be a good project so they can refer to that. It should be a reference book when they're dealing with OSHA, to come up and have something they can look at. They can look at an alternative. So that's critical. It's critical in making the ideas work in the legislative sense. The two can't be separated as far as I'm concerned. And I am happy to try to deal with both, and it's for this reason that I have pursued putting out a Freedom Report where I consider it quite modest, but something that is attractive to a lot of people who might not have read it otherwise. They aren't interested in reading economic textbooks, but they might receive a short, easily read piece or an article sent to them from me. And I have a large number of people on that list. And I'm always trying to expand those numbers. And I can get a lot of people to read that wouldn't have read otherwise. So this is the spread of the ideas. But I couldn't come to Washington. I mean, it's hard enough as it is, I think, being at the early stages of a libertarian revolution. But there is nothing if I'm standing by myself, but because of the groups, the groups in Wisconsin and Newark and Alaska and Texas, all through the country that are growing now. This will make the difference. The only real question I have, and I believe Hayek states this question too, or doubt, and is how much time does it take to make sure that the people will endorse those ideas and understand why we can abolish OSHA and EPA and come up with something else without destroying the country? Will there be enough people to understand that, if you did go to a sound currency, possibly there's a little bit more adjustment period than some of us would like. Maybe there will be a bit of malinvestment and debt to be liquidated. And will they be patient enough to wait 6 months or 10 months or a year and keep your hands off? That's a big question. And right now, today, I would say no. They have no patience at all. And that we stand on the verge of attempting to impose our ideas, and yet, at the same time, we stand on the brink of a holocaust economically and socially. Because if the money doesn't work and the welfare checks won't buy anything, the people who have been conditioned that they have a right to your wallet and they don't receive the purchasing power stolen from your efforts, yes, they're going to revolt. And then there's going to be chaos, and our attempt to change things will go down the drain. That's why I think it's so important that in dealing with the ideas that we may have the ideal that we would like. Ideally, there should be no post office, and there should be private delivery of mail. But that doesn't mean that I should draw up a law today and abolish the post office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that would be it, even though I think that probably would work pretty well. I think it would, by the day after, I think it would be delivering mail again. But as a suggestion that the people might accept a little easier is just legalize the right for you to deliver your first-class mail. And the transition would come. And that's why I think the idea of competing currencies is so good. And something that is achievable. I'm optimistic enough to think that we may get a major part of that into the majority report. They would never accept the idea that tomorrow we will quit monetizing debt and we will have a gold currency. That's not going to happen. But they see the true anti-gold pro-paper person is less threatened by gold and say, yeah, if you kooky people want to hold gold coins, go ahead. And we'll mint coins and let you have them. I think it'd be more difficult to get rid of the legal tender laws and get rid of the taxation on the buying and the selling of the gold. But we're making inroads into this idea that we ought to have it stand on its merits, the paper money versus the gold money. So I am very, very hopeful. I think psychologically, if nothing else, even if we didn't start using the gold immediately, psychologically, if if the Gold Commission came out at March 31st and said the Treasury will now mint 1/10, 1/2, 1/4 ounce gold coins and to be sold to the American people, and the liberals say, oh, that's great, we're going to mess up the South Africans, you know, and they'll say, yeah, that's good, we'll sell them and let the people buy them. And let them mint them as often as possible. You know, I've always worried about, a lot of people aren't too convinced we have the gold at Fort Knox, and I don't even know if we do. But, and they won't audit it, so I figure, well, let's sell it. That'll be the best audit ever. We'll find out if it's there. Let the gold, and I used to believe more strongly that the gold had to be in the hand of the government because it had to be a government 100% gold coin standard, and we couldn't do it on our own. But I'm more convinced every day that the safest thing we can do is secure our liberties, allow the marketplace to work, and get the hands in the hands of the people. Get the gold in the hands of the people. And it would work. I mean, we wouldn't have to worry about it. Matter of fact, even it would be a tragedy if the gold didn't exist in Fort Knox. But even without it, I think that with freedom and with the incentives that come along with a free market, the market could handle it. The gold would come to the country. We would become productive, and prices would adjust. So it's a matter of convincing the people that they don't have anything to fear about freedom. I think that it takes a lot of understanding about the transition so that we can teach them to keep their hands off. Very often I compare this to what happens when and this doesn't happen quite so much as it did a few years ago, but when penicillin first came out, the physician was inundated with people coming in because penicillin was given so carelessly. Patient would come in, would have a viral cold, and I want a shot of penicillin, doc, you know. And so, well, you know, the patient's pressuring the doctor's harassed, and the doctor's going to make an extra $10, so he gives him a shot of penicillin. It doesn't do anything with the cold, and it complicates things. It makes his condition worse because penicillin is dangerous to those people who are allergic. It makes bacteria so that they're not susceptible to the penicillin. So it has all kinds of potential complications if you give antibiotics carelessly. That's the way it is in the economy. You know, if you keep your hands off, things will solve the problems as well. And it takes a good doctor who can say, but you need to go home and take a rest and just let things be, you know, and we don't need to be interfering with you. But today, I'm afraid, really what we face is the crisis soon if the unemployment rates jumps to 10, 11, 12%. Is the Federal Reserve going to say tight, you know, and are they going to turn the money supply loose? And what will happen to the unemployment benefits? What will happen to all those programs? Our side is still too weak. And that's why the efforts that have to be made in the educational field, I think, can't be underemphasized. I don't feel secure that we have done all the work necessary educationally. And we have to popularize them. Even though it is true that a movement only needs 3 or 4% of the people totally dedicated and understanding it, you still have to have a consensus of the people not to fear what you're doing and be convinced that you're right, and you have to be leading the way in a conventional sense with the media and the government and people getting up and standing up and leading so that people do not panic. And that's what we need. We need time. I believe if we had a monetary and economic catastrophe tomorrow, the next day, or the next year, the net result would be negative. I think that we would lose more freedoms. But I believe that if we had some more time, the chances would be much better that the groundwork will be done and that we can impose change if we can get the people to understand that a price probably will have to be paid. I haven't bought the argument that there will be no price to pay for the unwise spending of the 50 years and the unwise inflation. If it were so easy to go from where we are and say that we can wave a magic wand and don't worry about deficits don't matter and all this, and say that we can go to a gold standard and interest rates are going to come down and everything's going to be all right. Do you know that's the best argument I've ever heard for 50 years of inflation? Man, I'd do that. I'd go for 50 years of inflation if we can switch our direction and there's no penalty pay. Now, that's the tough part. Who's going to bring it on and say, yes, this is it and we must do it? But I'm optimistic to think that we're in better shape than we were. The movement certainly is growing for those who believe in individual liberty, and that it has to be kept going. But I believe that we're at a critical stage, and I believe in the next few years you're going to see the results. Let's just hope and pray that we don't have an international or a national catastrophe that sets us back. So to me, it's most important that groups like the Council for Competitive Economy are encouraged and continue to be supported. They need to help. They are effective. Congressmen, by the way, Rich, are very, very much aware of ratings. You get some respectability and they hear about this and they don't like to be rated low. You know, that's bad. So keep it up. Do 2 or 3 a year or something. Keep after them. Tell them they rate lousy and send it to their district or something. You know, but they don't like to be rated, and if they're rated poorly. So I think all these things are great, and you should be encouraged and thanked, because I'm convinced that groups like this and National Taxpayers Union and others are very, very much of a help to me. And someday soon, we're going to get several more dozen over here that believe the same way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Paul. Our policy, whenever possible, is to not let people go away without having the chance to ask a few questions. So if you don't mind, we'll take a few if you got them. Questions?
Yes, sir.
Votes in the ballot box are essential to public opinion and changing public policy, and for electing people the likes of Ron Ball and others who respect what the Council for Competitive Economy stands for: limited government, individual freedom, free market economy, and economic growth with the investment of private capital resources and the privilege to accumulate. And we have language barriers because of the influx of many foreign elements into our country that don't know what the legitimate functions of government or free society really are. And we must depend on those people that have platforms, the likes of you, to tell them this, or to come to an audience of people, this kind of association, so that we can filter down to the mentality of absorption for the electorate with one man, one vote, because that's what puts you in office and keeps you there. And once you get off away from the practice of medicine, your life's work, and get into another vocational activity or forgotten country, and in order to sleep on a pillow stuffed with the feathers of a clear conscience, not necessarily as a politician, but a statesman, you don't want to evade the truth. You want to speak it, which makes a difference between the politician and the statesman, who'd rather die for cause than to sell his soul to the country store, and because he couldn't live with it. And I think that this country has been based on high principles. And I don't see why the likes of you at any time, or anyone of your kind, would have to do that. Now, what are your potentials and what is your thinking on this kind of political action to preserve a competitive economy? Because freedom follows the free market like night to day. And when the economy is free, we can attain those nice things.
And you're thinking along the terms of what am I going to do outside the legislative realm, and what can I...
Recommendations which you have to change, not here in Washington, because you're on a merry-go-round here all the time, and I tell you there's a lot of confusion. But let me tell you, the thing that puts you in office is back in your hometown,
right,
your own area.
Well, I don't know if I understand the question completely, but I think that is part of the responsibility and the obligation I have is to continue to communicate with these people and anybody and everybody else that I can, for them to understand, what the issue is all about and what the philosophy is all about. But I think this is done differently by everybody.
Do you have a translation in Spanish? Now, you have many Spanish-speaking people down.
No, I don't.
Or don't you in your area?
Oh, well, there are some Spanish-speaking people, but I don't speak Spanish. I have enough trouble understanding this all in English,
You could get someone to do that for you.
Yeah.
What is the mechanism for going to a gold standard? In other words, if Reagan woke up tomorrow morning and was convinced that this was the only thing to do. What is the procedure?
There are different procedures. I have one that is proposed in the form of legislation, and it would essentially say that there would be no more monetization of debt. The government would live within their means, and the Federal Reserve note would be redeemed at a market value of gold set in 1 year. And the government would get out of the business of monetizing debt completely and totally, and their budget would be balanced. But there are various other forms, and this is a difficult question. I don't know the very best because, matter of fact, today I was talking with Murray Rothbard on this very subject, and he has some questions in his mind too, and I respect him as being one of the brightest free market economists. And his proposal is that that you set a price of gold very, very high, so that you don't have to worry about deflation. A few times in the past, they've set the price low, like in England in the 20s, and it didn't last. So he suggests that it be set high by the government rather than the market. And I think all these different considerations have to be considered, but that should be what we're really debating, in the Gold Commission, rather than monetarism is what we've drifted into.
Many businessmen who espouse free enterprise, and I'll put the word free in quotes, are also those who seek subsidies, protection, tariffs, what have you. Wouldn't competitive enterprise really be a better term to use?
Well, I'd be very favorable to that term. Matter of fact, it's rarely that I use the word free enterprise or laissez-faire. Laissez-faire connotes a lot of negativism, and free enterprise sort of is a word that people get turned off with. Competitive enterprise tells you a little bit more. I usually use the word the market economy, the free market. But I think a competitive economy is exactly what we're looking for.
I've been an activist in politics since maybe '76, and the biggest kitchen coffee table debate is where is the constituency? And this has been a constant subject of discussion amongst my friends in the last 5 years. In your opinion, looking at the diversity of this group as an example, if you were going out to find the market for these ideas, okay, where do you think the most important places are to sell the ideas at? What's the most fertile ground?
Are you talking about in a political sense or in an educational sense?
Political sense.
In a political sense, there's no answer, because the number one reason why I think I'm in Congress is that the majority of the people of the district trusted me. So your constituency is every place, and that I cared about a working man as much as I cared about a businessman's profit. My rating went down in the NASA area, which was real Republican. I still got 62%. That's pretty good. I could have gotten maybe 70 if I'd played all their games. But the labor district, my vote went up. Not because I was a champion of labor unions, but because they trusted me and they thought I cared about what was happening to their pocketbook with the inflation. They didn't understand about it. So the constituency is every place. So I would never narrow it down and narrow somebody's targets down. It's to be broad-based and go after everybody. And it depends, of course, whether you're approaching it as a Democrat versus a Republican versus libertarian. It just depends so much on the political approach in the group. But you don't decide, well, there's a free market people that we reject the bankers. There's a lot of people in the banking business that believe in sound money, and that you don't reject it. And I think that's what I do sometimes. I get careless, and sometimes I get to the point where I figure, well, most businessmen aren't free market. Well, that's wrong. Most businessmen are good free market people, and all they want is a chance, because the small businessmen, the ones that give the bad reputation, are the international people who are in trade and want tariffs and can bid up the contracts. But that's a small number of people. I mean, there are 3 big companies that needed the port dug deep, and the political consensus of everybody was that was the key to all the votes in my hometown. And yet my vote went up in that district, and I didn't raise a finger to do anything to get more federal money into the district. So I think there's a misperception. I think that the constituency is every place, and you should address that. But you have to recognize that that eventual vote isn't going to come because I had this very definite viewpoint on liberty.
The last 30 years, there's been, in my view, an unfortunate association of free enterprise philosophy with militarism and foreign interventionism. Do you see this changing at all?
The changing away from the association of the so-called free market and militarism? No, I would say it's probably being enhanced in the last year or so. That, again, I think is information needs to be out. We don't have any one major group. We have a group maybe talking about a competitive economy and somebody talking about gold and somebody talking about taxes. But how many groups, non-tax foundations who are dedicated to working for a non-interventionist foreign policy? I don't know of any educational group that way. But I know one thing, that if you want to talk about a good subject with average conservative Republicans, I can get them applauding every time about, do you think it's time we ought to quit paying for the defense of Japan when they take the money and give it to their car companies? You know, they're sick of it. They say, oh, is that right? I said, yeah, you want me to spend, you want to know why I don't vote for all those military budgets? Then they understand it. They never get it offered. So I would say there is a source, or there is a vacuum that could be filled by a group that would promote that. Because I think the American people are basically ready, more so than ever. Yes, after the war, Europe was torn up. We were wealthy. Give them a couple bucks, you know, just because we're eventually going to destroy the dollar. They can't see all that. But now the dollar's destroyed and they're broke. They can't buy a house. They can't buy a car. And, you know, they want something done. So they're ready for that. And when you tell them that, you know, you're spending more money and you're getting less defense. You're not even getting any defense. Chrysler's getting a contract for tanks that don't work, you know, and it's getting worse. And do you feel any more secure because you have tanks that don't work that you're going to send to Europe? Do you feel more secure because we're building bombs that the Germans won't let us put over there where they're supposed to be? You know, it's just a ridiculous struggle. Do you feel more secure because we're going to send $3 billion worth of weapons to Pakistan so they can fight India? Why don't you want to give AWACS to Saudi Arabia? Well, because I don't want the F-15s that we gave to Israel to shoot them down. You know? It goes on and on. So,
Dr. Paul, one theme that I detected in your comment about your success in the last election, the fact that people trust you. I know that you've used the ethical perspective on the free market, arguing that it's not just efficient, but it's morally correct. And we here at the Council for a Competitive Economy have stressed that in our work in Congress, because we know that when businessmen go to a congressman and say, well, we go along to get along and vote for us and we'll pay you off. How do you see your success as it relates to the use of the ethical argument by congressmen to argue that the free market is right, regardless of whether it helps my district? Do you think congressmen can be persuaded to go that direction?
not very often, unfortunately. I don't think that means you should not keep pursuing it, and maybe they will accept that as a legitimate argument. But I've made the statement, I hope someday this is going to be an incorrect statement, but the weakest argument in a committee hearing is to use a moral or a constitutional argument. That doesn't carry much weight. Pragmatism is the only thing. What's it going to do? They'll have things like a housing bill coming up, and there's an amendment proposed. Well, the person proposing the amendment will then have a sheet of paper just like that goes out, and they'll have it broken down by the computer, what it means to Texas, what it means to Houston, what it means to District 22, what it means. That's the thing that carries the weight, is that pragmatic argument under that circumstance. Now, if they want to vote a certain way and they know you have a moral argument, they'll love it and they'll use it, but they'll be hypocritical about it. There are some of the worst anti-constitutional congressmen over there who love to recite to Congress because they happen to be right, say, on the draft. And they will, champion that. And I think that's that association that sometimes they desire to have with me when I happen to be in their corner. But they don't really care about an overall concept of the Constitution and really defend the Constitution down the line. But when it's beneficial to them, they'll recite the Constitution or a moral argument. But I think it should be continued to be used, and I think as there's a transition up here, and we'll get new people, and they'll be more reasonable. I'm afraid our time has run out, and thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Congressman Paul. Your comments about the penicillin case and Bob's talking about the solving economic problems through the marketplace remind me that my philosophy in the economy, political economy, through the council is the same as my father, who has been a physician for 45 years. And I asked him one time what his secret was, and he said that very early in his career he learned that most people would get better if he didn't do something to kill them. And I think that's it. Thank you all very much for coming. We've had a very successful conference. Thank you.